Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having about the culture and business surrounding end-of-life care. This week, I'm speaking with the grave woman, Joél Maldonado, about how she built a education program aimed at some of the holes that she discovered when she was a mortuary school student and a working funeral director. Today, she mostly does teaching and some pre-need sales, but we'll get into all of that after this quick message from Passages International. Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, we specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or our unique memorial keepsakes, we help create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate a life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. So you are the grave woman on social media, but that is kind of like the new part of a career that's kind of been going on. So how did you get to become the grave woman and why?
So, Tony, I honestly believe that becoming a grave woman is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I drew a picture when I was 8 years old of myself standing in a cemetery with a microphone, talking either to or for the graves, and it said, "I am the grave woman." And my grandmother held on to this this picture that I drew and gave it to me when I graduated high school as a part of a memory book. So fast forward about 10 years, I'm in mortuary school and I am cleaning out an apartment that I'm getting ready to move out of with my sister. And my sister is going through this book that she finds in a box, and lo and behold, here's this picture. The funny thing is, while in mortuary school, I started a blog called The Grave Woman, having no memory of this photo. And so it's self-fulfilling prophecy.
Talk about deciding to go to mortuary school, because you're our first generation, right?
My uncle was a funeral director.
But you didn't grow up with him, right? You knew about him, but you didn't grow up in his funeral home.
I would visit him at the funeral home very often. So no, I didn't live with him and live at the funeral home, but I did visit the funeral home a lot with him.
So would you say that was kind of your inspiration for going to mortuary school?
Definitely. I have always been morbidly curious and run towards death when other people have kind of run away from it. But it's kind of been something that's always been around me. I share that, again, the elder women in my family and elders in my community served as what we would call death doulas now. They cared for people in transition and were always going to funerals, cooking for families, and cleaning houses. And so it kind of felt like a natural progression. It's always been something like in the back of my mind.
I want to put a pin in that because we're going to talk, of course, about that in a little bit. But I also want to talk about your blog. So you start mortuary school. Where did you go to mortuary school?
I went to mortuary school at the Gupton Jones Mortuary College in Atlanta, Georgia.
And where do you live now?
I live in Beaufort, South Carolina.
When you were in mortuary school, what was the impetus for starting that blog?
I needed an outlet. I was really, for the first time in my life, contemplating my own mortality. And I was also seeing a lot of things that didn't make sense to me, like the fact that we were learning how to care for white families and people that practice traditionally Eurocentric religions, but there was no care for people that look like me, or nor education about care for people that look like me.
These are the kind of things that you address in the blog, because you also have a particular, and this is what I was kind of hinting at earlier, you have a very particular cultural background.
Yes. So the things I would talk about in the blog first would be like life goes on. I remember going on a removal for the first time during a clinical and removing this person whose family was devastated and going out into traffic in Atlanta, taking this person to the funeral home. And everyone's life was just going on. And that was such a weird experience to me. And so I'd write about things like that, or about the difference in talking to white families, Black families, Hispanic families. Yes.
Do you want to talk about some of those differences?
Absolutely. A lot of times, I don't think we as death care professionals are aware of the language that we're using, and how some language could be offensive depending on whose culture or ethnicity we're referring to. The perfect example I'll give is the word ashy. In the funeral home, I've heard funeral directors or embalmers refer to decedents as ashy, or their hair as being nappy, or someone being dark skinned, and using that language when talking to families, which is completely inappropriate and offensive depending on who you're talking to. And so that was my outlet to kind of talk about these things without holding them inside.
Right, because that way, at least you know that someone's having the conversation, even if it is just you.
Right. Right.
Once you graduated from mortuary school and got to work, where did you go to work, and what was your experience there like?
My first job right out of mortuary school had nothing to do with funeral service. I started working for Emory University doing something totally unrelated, but it was through meeting individuals at Emory University, the anatomical lab where people donate their bodies.
Hmm.
I got in contact with a gentleman named Mr. Daniel Gillis, who is now the owner of Young Funeral Home in Atlanta, Georgia, where I did my apprenticeship. While also working at Emory and with Mr. Gillis, I worked for a corporation in their prep center, because I wanted to work with more diverse families and decedents.
And that was kind of a theme all the way through, because one of the interesting things, and we have a feature coming out on you in Funeral Service Insider as well. One of the things that never even occurred to me is that no matter what color or what skin type you have as a mortuary student, most of the cadavers are a very kind of specific, color.
Yes. In
Skin
a
type.
lot of situations there are, unless you're in a big city like in Atlanta or Chicago, maybe even in New York or California, a city in California, that is definitely the case. I remember at Gupton Jones, the first person that we had in the cadaver lab was an African American woman who had locks. And it was amazing to see some of my non Black classmates ask questions about her hair that were not questions for me, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, it absolutely does make sense, because that's how you saw that real divide. There are some things that you were expected to know naturally, and there are some things that the white students, let's say, weren't expected to know, and that is how to deal with hair in general. But hair in general there just means white hair.
Right. In mortuary school, we learned how to, for example, shampoo white decedents. That was a standard protocol in the embalming process. A person comes in, they get a shampoo. However, real life experience working for a corporation, the standard protocol is if you don't know what to do with their hair, you call the hairdresser. And a lot of times there meant Black people or people with textured hair, not just limited to Black people, but in most cases, Black people, someone with textured hair. We weren't educated about things like shrinkage or shampooing, conditioning, and detangling. And so I started to ask questions like, well, why is this standard protocol for this group of people? But then when this group of people comes in, we have to then outsource this responsibility, or people are able to throw their hands up and say, I don't know what to do with this, or everyone looks at me to do this. And so, yeah, it was a little bit frustrating, Tony.
I can imagine so speaking with you last time, the first thing that occurred to me was, as a child, my crayons had a skin tone. My crayon said skin, but it wasn't skin tone really. It was peach.
Mhm.
But the idea was that this is the color that skin is, and then that is how you should think about skin. But of course, it's not the case. Skin needs different care, especially dead skin. The skin of the dead, I guess, is a better way to say that. Than just there's no standard protocol for that.
Right. There's also no standard education about language. And one of the courses that I teach, the Melanin Makeup Masterclass course, we learn about appropriate language for different skin tones, whether they be on a white person or a person of color. Things like hyperpigmentation and correcting hyperpigmentation, whether it be someone's natural skin condition or from bruising or trauma, is different for people of different skin tones and skin shades. And again, in mortuary school, we learned that basic color wheel, basic color theory. But again, much of the attention was put towards that peach complexion.
Yeah. And so how did you decide to make the leap? Because you were working, and you still do work as a funeral director.
I do not work traditionally as a funeral director anymore. I do not. I work with funeral homes to do pre-need.
I
And
see.
yes, I also full-time operate the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy. But I made the leap through the encouragement of my mentor, Miss Anita Grant. She's also known in the death care space as the NBE review coach. She found me on YouTube and wanted to interview me for, I guess, her podcast or something that she was doing. And during our conversation, she said, the videos that you're making on YouTube and the things you're writing about in your blogs could be turned into CE courses for professionals. And so through her tutelage and encouragement, I did that. And during 2020, at the peak of the pandemic, I took the leap into offering courses full time as CE credits for professionals.
And tell me about that process, because it must be, and that's a tough pitch. This is hi, I'm new. This is a class that no one's ever taught before. Give me permission to give other people permission to call themselves experts in it, right? That's a big deal. So what was that process like?
I will say that the Academy for Professional Funeral Service Practice, APFSP, does have an application process that is strenuous. You have to submit your resume and basically, I don't want to say sell yourself, but present yourself as an expert or professional in whatever area you're talking about. But I believe in divine timing, as with all things. Something happened that propelled the courses forward and generated interest. And that was the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And one of the first classes that I offered was a class about racism and death care. That was not only about the experience of myself and several other people that had reached out from online about racist things that they were experiencing on the job, during services, and while going to school, but funeral professionals had interest because now there was something on the TV all of the time reminding them that, hey, there's some things that we need to learn about communities that look different, pray different, grieve different, and think about end of life different than we do.
And when you started to do this, what was your the initial reaction? You had mostly positive responses and a lot of participation pretty quickly, right?
Absolutely. The class literally went viral across the world in the death care space. And we had hundreds of people to sign up. Myself and Anita taught this class together. And from then, the ball just kept rolling, and it's still rolling now.
That is fantastic. And can you talk about some of your other course offerings, some of the things that you offer?
Absolutely. So, one thing that I offer is an ebook, and it's entitled 30 Things to Say Other Than I'm Sorry When Someone Dies. I wrote that book because I know what it's like to want to express condolences, but the only words that come to our minds are, I'm sorry. But that doesn't feel like enough sometimes, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I sat down and thought about, hey, what are some other things that we can say, not only to families, but to friends and to people in our everyday lives that would resonate a little bit more deeply and express our thoughts a little bit better than I'm sorry. That's an ebook that's available for sale on our website. I also have several self-study courses that pertain to cultural competency specifically. They are courses that range from removing braids, twists, and other extensions, shampooing, conditioning, and detangling textured hair, properly caring for locks and twists. I mentioned the Melanin Makeup Masterclass. I also have a few conversational courses. And by conversational, I mean that they aren't necessarily self-study, even though they do include a recording if you can't make the live class. But they're classes that are designed to challenge our perspective. One is entitled Cultural Kaleidoscope, Challenging Perspectives and Building Culturally Competent Death Care. It's a 3-week in-person, meaning virtual, instructor-led course where we talk about bias and how it impacts our work as death care professionals. And then we have the faith, religion, and culture for end of life and death care, which is a 12-week instructor-led course where we explore 11 of the major but non-discussed faith, religion, and cultural sex and how our work as death care professionals can be enhanced through understanding those, whether it's through offering certain services and merchandise or simply having conversations with diverse families. And lastly, for mortuary students, we have a 6-course self-guided or self-study package called Mortuary School Mastery.
Hi, I want to take a couple seconds to talk to you about Kates-Boylston events. So we have virtual events and webinars pretty much every month on a wide variety of topics, and you can find them and register for them at events.katesboylston.com, and there's a link to that in the show notes. What's cool about these virtual events is that they're permanent. So if you decide you'd like to come to something and then for some reason you can't make it the next day, you'll get a link to the video, which you can watch at your leisure. And it always has contact information so you can still ask questions of the presenters even when they're not presenting live. I also want to give you the heads up that coming up in June, we have our next in-person event. It is our annual technology think tank, and always one of the best and most exciting events that we have. We have people from all over the industry, and it's different experts every time talking about innovations that are on the rise in funeral service and how you can use them to help improve the way that you execute your daily business. What's cool about it is the better you can use technology, the more time you can free up to actually serve families, to do the job that you want to do. And this is just 2 days of constant information about little things you can do. You can use it all, but a lot of times if you can just come away with 1 or 2 tips that can change your business, it really can make all the difference. It's the same show note link. You can go and sign up. You can see the speakers and the agenda. It's going to be a great time. This time we are holding it in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a cool little city that kind of speaks for itself. But anyway, check it out, events.katesboylston.com, and link to that in the show notes. Now, let's get back to this conversation. You work with the Gullah-Geechee community? Did I say it wrong? I'm sorry.
It's okay. So I am of Gullah-Geechee descent.
Gullah.
Gullah stems from the word Angola, which is a culture and country in West Africa, from which enslaved Africans were brought here to my backyard, which is the Port Royal Sound, and dispersed throughout the United States and Americas, South America and North America. And because of what happened during the onset of the Civil War, which started very close to here in between where I am, Beaufort and Charleston, slave owners abandoned their plantations and left their enslaved people. And we were left to practice our culture, which is that Gullah-Geechee culture. Yes.
And you have kind of taken this as one of the, I mean, it's your culture, so it makes more sense. But to kind of, as a particular focus, helping this community with its death practices, death rites.
Well, it's a little bit deeper than that. So because this is where we as enslaved people were bought and dispersed from, or bought to and dispersed from, a lot of our culture resonates with African Americans throughout the Black diaspora here in the United States and in the Americas. And what I mean by that is that this is where our culture is alive. This is where it stems from. And even if families have migrated to New York or California or Canada, South America, our roots are here. And so it's not just helping and shining light on the culture here in South Carolina, but the culture throughout the Black diaspora.
And so what are some of the ways that you're able to do that and to reach out?
Definitely. Are you asking specifically about rituals and practices? Are you asking about things that I offer?
Well, rituals and practices first, and then things that you offer to kind of top that off.
I think the easiest way to answer that question would be that putting meaning behind some of the things that we as people in the African diaspora do naturally. For example, something like clapping our hands, right? We see that as just clapping our hands, but really, like in our culture, we believe that that's an invocation of spirit. And so when someone's passing away or when someone has died, a lot of times you'll see people at bedside clapping, not clapping because we're happy, but clapping because maybe we're praying and we're singing. We're singing because in our culture, singing is a connection to the divine, a connection to spirit. And so we're elevating that person's spirit. Speaking of elevating, some people perform ancestral veneration, which is a way of elevating a deceased spirit and helping them along their journey through the afterlife, our beliefs about the afterlife. A lot of times you'll hear us talk about homegoing services as opposed to
Right.
funeral. Homegoing services are a lot more energy fueled and celebratory in nature than your traditional funeral, which tends to be more Eurocentric in nature. And so there's just several subtle differences that may seem like a little deal, but they're really a big deal because they're tied to those ancestral Gullah-Geechee or Angolan West African roots. Now, what do I offer that aligns with that? We host an annual Gullah-Geechee cultural immersion excursion here in Beaufort, South Carolina, and surrounding Sea Islands, where for 2.5 days we're exploring and witnessing and participating in the vibrant Gullah-Geechee culture through visiting museums, through eating good food, through having and participating in ring shouts, which are a celebratory prayer circle, and singing, dancing, clapping, and just enjoying one another's company and connecting with the spirit of our roots.
It's interesting that you mentioned clapping, um, only because I've been to lots of white churches and there's very little clapping that goes on during the service.
There's so many subtle things, Tony. I could go on and on just about the symbolism behind things that we as Indigenous and Black people do naturally that are so deeply tied into our cultural roots that sometimes we don't even realize. And so, what we do here at the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy is not only shed light on these things, but we truly believe that culture is the medicine for grief. And if that's the case, I serve as the medicine woman through teaching death care professionals about cultures, not just my own, and how we can use that medicine to show up in service for the families that we serve.
And that makes perfect sense because when you put it that way, it makes me feel like death is this is an opportunity to connect with a greater, larger whole
Yeah,
that goes through time and history and not just the life of the particular person that we're celebrating or remembering.
absolutely. We believe that that medicine is culture and that it helps the world heal through navigating grief. And what we try to do is provide a range of specialized courses and trainings and workshops that highlight this beautiful cultural myriad and serve through that. They're served through that lens. Again, so much of death care, and I have to say this, has been whitewashed through cultural erasure and through the introduction and indoctrination of Eurocentric funeral and death care practices. And I think the industry and the world is trying to return home to our culture in that sense.
Because it is breaking open, and that is across cultures and color barriers in general. As you mentioned, like you have a death doula culture, but that is kind of rising out in all sorts of places now because this idea of making death more personal and returning, honestly, a lot of women's attention toward the entire end of life and not just the, let's say ritual bathing after, but having people who are responsible as guides at the end of life is something that is just appealing on a much wider basis than 5 years ago.
Yeah, it is. And I think that awakening that you're talking about was brought about by COVID. And I know for a lot of us, being funeral directors during the COVID pandemic kind of was contradictory to the reason that we got into funeral service. I had the honor of participating in a project for the Library of Congress called the COVID-19 Oral History Project with Anita, MBE review coach. And we interviewed about 30 professionals from different walks of the funeral service industry who were in the trenches during the pandemic. And the one thing that we kept hearing was, I didn't get into funeral service to feel like I'm operating an assembly line. I got into this industry because I wanted to serve families. And there are lots of things that I had to learn on the spot that I didn't know. And so I think what you're talking about is a rebirth and a realization that this is not just capitalism. This is not just come in and write a check. This is come in and let's have a conversation. Come in and let me help you heal. Come in and let me hold your hand through this process, which are very feminine attributes.
For your part now, it's complex. Funeral service is late to the technology game, I think it's fair to say.
I think that's a fair statement.
But there's also kind of like this crush, and I say this without intending any insult at all, but there is this kind of influencer culture where everyone with a TikTok account gets to also have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who, like, for instance, you're accredited, and it's got to be tough to do your job in a place where there's so much noise. Is that the right way to put it?
I felt that way for a while, but I'll tell you what helped me, Tony, checking in with my ego. The word influencer is a very powerful word, but I have to ask myself, what am I influencing people to do? Or what are others trying to influence people to do? I am a huge believer in the work that I'm doing is sacred. And because that work is sacred, Spirit will carry the message to those who need it. Spirit will carry the courses to those who need it. So I try not to necessarily push my beliefs on others. I tell the truth. My truth is not always wrapped in a bow. My truth sometimes rattles the cage of the system, but ultimately, my goal is to educate and help professionals better serve diverse communities. And I think as long as that's at the forefront, the noise kind of disappears for me.
So, do you have a sense of the demographics that you're serving? Like, are you able to cross, let's say, racial lines for people? I interviewed a gentleman, I don't know, recently. I don't know when this is coming out, and I don't know what day it is now, honestly. So, but he intentionally, this was a Black guy who intentionally bought a white funeral home with the idea of doing this kind of integration project where everyone kind of learns to care for everyone. But that's a scary proposition for someone. Like, if you know how to, I've been to Black barbers, and when the first time I went to a Black barber, the guy said, "Do you have an extra couple minutes? I'm going to get my son because white people don't come in here often enough, and he needs practice."
Right.
And it was, and I'd make an appointment, and the son would come, and this was like an extra little barber school that he got. Do you have much of like the reverse of that? Do you feel like you have enough white people learning to handle hair and skin that aren't like theirs?
Absolutely. That's honestly the majority of my demographic. However, I like to use this opportunity to say that though my courses are intended to educate people that don't know how to do certain things, those people aren't only white people. I have had the experience of going to school and working as a master hair care specialist, which is why I know what I know and why I can do what I do, right? However, that is not the experience of every Black person. Every Black woman or man does not know how to do hair. And so my courses are for any professional that needs either to learn about culture, need to learn how to better serve diverse communities, or learn to work with textured hair and melanated skin. It's not limited, or you're not excluded because you are a certain skin color.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have 4 daughters, and I still, they're grown and gone, and I've braided one of their hairs once. I know how their hair works, but I just don't know what to do with it. Like,
Right.
just the learning what to do with hair is already kind of a complex thing. And then adding different types of hair on top of it. And this is not even considering, skin and nails and clothes.
Right. And it's not, I'm very transparent with anyone that I teach. My job is not to make you into a barber or cosmetologist. My job is to teach you very specific skills, technical skills, in some cases that are going to be needed to care for the decedents that come into your care. At the end of the day, there are things that you will not know how to do, and that's on either side of the spectrum. And that's when you either call in a professional or let the family take the lead on that. But things like shampooing, like I talked about, that were standard protocol for one demographic should be standard protocol across the board. Things like removing braids and extensions. I tell the horror story all the time of the preceptor that I walked in on cutting box braids from a woman's scalp because he thought that her braids came off instead of out. And had he gotten that lesson in mortuary school, that would not have happened. Had I not walked into that room, he would have completely maimed and mauled that woman.
Wow.
So, again, it's not limited to a certain demographic. It's open to whomever needs the technical training.
Excellent. And we are coming a little bit toward the end of our time here, although we have plenty of time. I do want to ask you if there's something that I should have asked and I didn't, or something that you thought you'd get the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it.
Actually, you've asked some pretty inclusive questions. I just want to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity, and the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy is here for funeral professionals, and we hope to see you in class at a conference or, online.
So I guess I should have asked this earlier, but it's a rotating, like I can start tomorrow if I want.
You can start right now. A
Yeah.
lot of our courses are self-study, and even the courses that are on schedule come with replays if you can't make the class. So technically, all of our courses are self-study. There are certain workshops. For example, we partnered with the Death Deck and the California Funeral Institute to host some time-limited classes and game nights. And so things that you see that are like workshops, maybe those aren't replay or accessible except for on certain dates. But we understand what it's like to be busy working in the funeral home and not be able to get away. So we wanted to make everything as accessible as possible. And all of our courses are approved for CE credits as well. So earn your CEs while you gain a new skill.
And that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? At Passages, we specialize in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or our unique memorial keepsakes, we help create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate a life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please check the show notes for all the links to all the things. That will put you in touch with Joél, and it will also give you an option to check out some of the events going on over at Kates-Boylston. I often host these webinar and events, and we have also the brief introduction series that we've been doing here. The audio version is a little bit of a teaser for some of these events. So if you're getting a kick out of that weekly show, definitely try to consider checking out our virtual and in-person events. And that will do it for this week on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.